Human rights are a set of principles concerned with equality and fairness. Every person has dignity and value in which to recognize the freedom to make their own choices about their lives and to develop potential as a human being. Its roots lie in earlier traditions and documents of many cultures. It is about living free from fear, harassment, or discrimination. Human rights can broadly be defined as several basic rights that people from around the world have agreed are essential. These include the right to life, the right to a fair trial, freedom from torture and other cruel and inhuman treatment, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the right to health, education, and an adequate standard of living. These human rights are the same for all people everywhere in the world, that is, men and women, young and old, rich and poor, regardless of someone's background, where they live, how they think, or what they believe. It constitutes a set of norms governing the treatment of individuals and groups by state and non-state actors based on ethical principles regarding what society considers fundamental to a decent life. These norms are incorporated into national and international legal systems, which specify mechanisms and procedures to hold the duty-bearers accountable and provide redress for alleged victims of human rights violations. The belief that most people under his or her humanity are entitled to certain human rights is fairly new. However, in earlier traditions and documents of many cultures, it took the catalyst of World War II to propel human rights onto the global stage and into the global conscience. Throughout history, people acquired rights and responsibilities through membership in a group, family, indigenous nation, religion, class, community, or state. The Hindu Vedas, the Babylonian Code of Hammurabi, the Bible, the Quran, and the Analects of Confucius are 5 of the oldest written sources that address questions of people's duties, rights, and responsibilities. In addition, the Inca and Aztec codes of conduct and justice and the Iroquois Constitution were Native American sources that existed well before the 18th century. All societies, whether in oral or written tradition, have had systems of decency and justice as well as ways of tending to the health and welfare of their members. The idea of human rights emerged stronger after World War II. The government then committed itself to establishing the United Nations, with the primary goal of bolstering international peace and preventing conflict. People wanted to ensure that never again would anyone be unjustly denied life, freedom, food, shelter, and nationality. The calls came from across the globe for human rights standards to protect citizens from abuses by their government, standards against which nations could be held accountable for the treatment of those living within their borders. These voices were critical in the San Francisco meeting that drafted the United Nations Charter in 1945. Human rights are one of the various rights conferred to individuals by the states in modern international law. The modern perspective on human rights is reflected in the Vienna Declaration adopted by the World Conference on Human Rights in June 1993. The declaration categorically states that all human rights are universal, indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated, and that democracy, development, and respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms are now interlinked and mutually reinforcing. The protection and advancement of human rights are linked to the goal of sustainable development in our globalized society. The Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, were created at the 2012 United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The plan was to create a set of global goals on the political, economic, and environmental challenges that humanity faces. The United Nations voted in 2015 to replace the 8 Millennium Development Goals with 17 globally applicable goals for sustainable development from 2015 to 2030. Each of the 17 goals seeks to reduce poverty and climate change globally while also enhancing economic growth, health, education, and the environment. The 17 sustainable goals are: to eradicate poverty in all of its manifestations worldwide, achieving food security and better nutrition while advancing sustainable agriculture is the goal of zero hunger. Ensuring healthy lifestyles and promoting well-being for people of all ages is crucial. 4. To guarantee inclusive and equitable quality education and encourage possibilities for lifelong learning for everyone. 5. Attain gender equality and empower all girls and women. 6. To guarantee that everyone has access to water and sanitation and sustainable management these resources. 7. That everyone has access to modern, affordable, dependable, and sustainable energy. 8. To encourage full and productive employment, decent work for all, and steady, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth. 9. To develop innovative solutions, encourage inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and construct robust infrastructure. 10. To reduce the disparity in income between and within nations. 11. Make cities and human settlements inclusive, secure, resilient, and sustainable by implementing sustainable practices. 12. To guarantee sustainable patterns of consumption and output. 13. Take immediate action to address climate change and its effects by limiting emissions and encouraging advancements in renewable energy. 14. Oceans, seas, and marine resources should be preserved and used sustainably for sustainable development. 15. Preserve and restore terrestrial ecosystems, encourage sustainable use, manage forests responsibly, fight desertification, stop and reverse land degradation, and stop biodiversity loss. 16. To encourage inclusive and peaceful societies for long-term growth, ensure that everyone has access to justice, and create inclusive, responsible, and efficient institutions at all levels. 17. Reinvigorate the international collaboration for sustainable development and fortify the implementation tools. Sustainable development requires collective efforts. International cooperation and partnerships are essential to achieve all of the SDGs. In essence, the SDGs form a structure to improve the condition to human rights standards with development issues. Individuals can use their human rights, such as the right of participating, equal opportunities for all, a decent life, and access to justice through these objectives. Human rights include the protections afforded by the state to workers who are eligible for education, healthcare, life, liberty and security. The UN report for 2024 highlights the advancements achieved in achieving Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. The report examines the opportunities and obstacles associated with achieving the SDGs and provides a global overview of progress since 2015. Among the articles included in the report on the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development that was sent by the Secretary-General to be accepted by General Assembly. The research indicates that progress towards the SDGs has been slow and uneven. Just over half, 50%, of the SDG targets are only making modest or moderate progress and just 17% are on target. The COVID-19 epidemic, wars, trade, geopolitics, and climate change have all hindered progress. In certain fields, there are improvements such as reducing the cost of remittances and decreasing HIV infection rates. It is imperative that we cease engaging in violence and warfare, which result in great suffering. We need to provide more financial and budgetary flexibility to developing nations. Human rights and ESG, environmental, social, and governance, are becoming more intertwined in today's corporate sector, indicating a rising recognition that corporations have duties beyond profit. ESG frameworks, which were originally designed to guide responsible investing, have expanded to include an emphasis on human rights, recognizing that the treatment of people and communities is an important part of ethical and sustainable business operations. Companies that incorporate human rights considerations into ESG can not only improve their image, but also produce long-term value and avoid risks. The environmental component of ESG examines how a company's operations affect the natural world, including its carbon footprint, resource utilization, and waste management procedures. While the environmental side focuses on climate change and biodiversity, it also has implications for human rights. Environmental degradation and pollution can have serious consequences for communities, particularly in vulnerable places. Air and water pollution, for example, can have an impact on local health, while deforestation can displace indigenous communities. Companies that commit to ecologically sustainable practices can help defend the rights of communities who depend on clean air, water, and land for their well-being. The social part of ESG is strongly related to human rights, focusing on how businesses engage with their employees, consumers, and communities. This encompasses labor rights, workplace safety, diversity and inclusion, and community relations. Companies that respect labor rights, pay fair wages, maintain safe working conditions, and promote diversity uphold fundamental human rights in their operations. Furthermore, in supply chains, firms are increasingly expected to verify that their suppliers follow the same guidelines. Companies, for example, may face reputational risk if their supply chains include forced labor or dangerous working conditions. Addressing social issues within ESG ensures that firms do not exploit individuals or destroy communities in the name of profit. The governance component of ESG is concerned with how organizations are run, including corporate ethics, board diversity, transparency, and accountability. Governance is critical in ensuring that environmental and social programs are more than just promises and are efficiently executed. Good governance promotes human rights by setting ethical standards and keeping businesses accountable. Transparency, an important part of governance, enables stakeholders to monitor company operations, fostering trust and accountability. The incorporation of human rights into ESG processes provides various advantages to businesses. First, it helps companies reduce risks, as abuses of human rights can result in legal problems, financial losses, and reputational harm. Second, it boosts a company's image and reputation, as customers and investors increasingly prefer companies that prioritize human rights and sustainability. Finally, it encourages long-term value creation since sustainable and ethical practices promote trust, loyalty, and resilience, all of which contribute to a company's stability and success. In conclusion, human rights and ESG are inextricably linked, demonstrating the recognition that a company's effect extends beyond its financial bottom line. Businesses that prioritize environmental sustainability, social responsibility, and good governance can help safeguard human rights, protect the environment, and contribute to a more equitable, sustainable world. As stakeholders, from customers to investors, demand greater accountability, including human rights into ESG is not only a moral obligation, but also a competitive advantage for businesses in the current era. After failing to stop the Second World War, the League of Nations dissolved. Following World War II, the concept of human rights gained attention. The world desperately needed some kind of international initiative to take control of the situation and restore the idea of fundamental freedoms and inalienable rights for everyone on equal terms. Following the defeat of Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, the United States, and Great Britain saw the urgent necessity to create an international organization whose main goal was to advance world peace and security. With its focus on international law, economic growth, human rights, peace, and security, the UN Charter mirrored the visions of British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and US President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Roosevelt's focus on the four freedoms, freedom of speech and expression, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear, foreshadowed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted after the war and included in the Atlantic Charter in August 1941. Creating an international organization to advance peace and avert future conflicts was the aim of the United Nations Conference on International Organization. On October 24, 1945, observed annually as United Nations Day, the charter of the newly established United Nations Organization. Human rights protection was the responsibility of the Economic and Social Council, which in turn created the Commission on Human Rights in January 1946. The 1948 ratification of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, UDHR, was the first and most well-known step. Several international treaties that guarantee human rights and state obligations relating to them have since followed. However, the UN has established additional internal institutions and agencies to monitor and oversee nations' activities and behavior relating to the recognition and implementation of human rights, because stated legal requirements are insufficient. The UN Human Rights Council, and its predecessor, the UN Commission on Human Rights, bodies that provide protection for experts, treaty bodies, established under the various UN human rights treaties, and organizations that oversee the application and enforcement of the pertinent treaties are examples of organs that provide political protection. As a result, the two primary categories of UN bodies that work to advance and defend human rights are charter bodies and treaty bodies. The UN's overarching goal of advancing human rights is carried out via charter bodies, which are created either by the Charter or by bodies that are constituted under it. Their wide-ranging duties include advancing human rights in every UN member state. It is the duty of treaty bodies to oversee and encourage adherence to a specific human rights agreement. They therefore only care about nations who have ratified that treaty. While the latter ones offer protection for experts, the former ones offer political protection. While the treaty bodies are made up of human rights specialists acting in their individual capacities, independent of their nationality and place of origin, the political UN human rights organizations are often constituted of delegates from member states. The High Commissioner for Human Rights oversees the operations of all these agencies and provides support and assistance to them. Each of the 193 member nations that make up the United Nations has one vote, making it the main body of the organization. The Assembly is tasked by Article 13 of the UN Charter with conducting research and formulating proposals to support the fulfillment of basic freedoms and human rights. The GA has a broad picture of the state of human rights around the world since it receives reports from other UN entities. The UN Human Rights Council, which was created by GA Resolution 6251 and plays the main role among charter organizations in the current UN system, is one of the most significant organs of the UNGA. After the 1993 World Conference on Human Rights, the United Nations Secretariat created the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR. The primary human rights representative of the United Nations, the High Commissioner for Human Rights holds the status of Under-Secretary General and is tasked to coordinate the organization's human rights initiatives. By encouraging international cooperation and directing the UN's human rights initiatives, it seeks to prevent human rights abuses and ensure that human rights are respected. With its headquarters located in Geneva, the OHCHR carries out a wide range of operations. Through field offices and UN peace missions, it also operates directly in regions where there are serious human rights violations. In 2006, the Human Rights Council was created by the General Assembly with the intention of making it more effective and efficient than the Human Rights Commission. Through the regional groups established inside the UN structure, membership seats are distributed according to the geographic distribution of member nations. Reviewing each UN member state's human rights record every 4 years and offering suggestions for improvement is one of its primary goals. The Human Rights Council is a subsidiary body of the General Assembly, whereas the Commission was a subsidiary body of the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC. Along with development, peace, and security, this elevation highlights human rights as one of the 3 fundamental pillars of the UN. First and foremost, states are required to provide formal reports on the state of human rights in the state being examined, using the format specified by the UNHRC. A foundational text in the history of human and civil rights, the Declaration consists of 30 articles detailing an individual's basic rights and fundamental freedoms, and affirming their universal character as inherent, inalienable, and applicable to all human beings. Articles 1 to 2 establish the basic concepts of dignity, liberty, and equality. Articles 3 to 5 establish other individual rights, such as the right to life and the prohibition of slavery and torture. Articles 6 to 11 refer to the fundamental legality of human rights with specific remedies cited for their defense when violated. Articles 12 to 17 set forth the rights of the individual towards the community, including freedom of movement and residence within each state, the right of property, the right to a nationality and right to asylum. Articles 18 to 21 sanction the so-called constitutional liberties and spiritual, public, and political freedoms, such as freedom of thought, opinion, expression, religion and conscience, word, peaceful association of the individual, and receiving and imparting information and ideas through any media. Articles 22 to 27 sanction an individual's economic, social and cultural rights, including healthcare. It upholds an expansive right to an adequate standard of living, and makes special mention of care given to those in motherhood or childhood. Articles 28 to 30 establish the general means of exercising these rights, the areas in which the rights of the individual cannot be applied, the duty of the individual to society, and the prohibition of the use of rights in contravention of the purposes of the United Nations organization. The United Nations adopted two human rights covenants in 1966, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Despite the universal acceptance of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, ratification of its relevant treaties is far from universal. They embody ideals and goals, but in themselves they provide no concrete framework for actually achieving them. The declaration may be universally endorsed, but the fact remains that people endowed with the rights enumerated in the UDHR live within states, and states remain sovereign. Human rights defenders can seek to institutionalize these principles through changes in law and policy, but it is states themselves that are the final arbiters. Nevertheless, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has been an important tool in promoting the rights of people around the world. The road ahead may be slow and winding, and there may be stagnation along the way, but one need only look back to see that a path is indeed being blazed. Amnesty International was founded in London in 1961 by British lawyer Peter Benenson. Sean McBride led the organization in the 1970s, and Amnesty International expanded its focus to fair trials and long periods of detention without conviction while advocating for political prisoners. Amnesty International also believed that governments tortured prisoners for the purpose of obtaining information they wanted, suppressing dissent through such acts of terror, or both. The organization was concerned that the use of torture, equipment, and methods could be exported from one superpower to other countries in the 1990s. Amnesty International continued to grow and develop, with more than 7 million members in more than 150 countries and regions. At the same time, Amnesty International also participated in a wide range of international affairs. For example, the Amnesty International South Africa Inquiry was established in 1992 to put pressure on the apartheid South African government, and also ended arms sales to the Great Lakes region of Africa, the area around the East African Rift Valley, and the death penalty. It is worth mentioning that Amnesty International also focuses on some specific groups, such as refugees, ethnic minorities, religious minorities, women, etc. After 2000, Amnesty International's agenda mainly turned to studying the challenges brought about by globalization and the reactions and actions of various sectors in the United States after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The issue of globalization has led to important changes in some of Amnesty International's policies, and the scope of work has also expanded to economic rights, social rights, and cultural rights, which Amnesty International had previously refused to get involved in. Amnesty International feels that it is very important to make a transformation. As for critics, the organization has selective attention and double standards in dealing with global human rights events. Amnesty International has long remained silent or only responded symbolically to events such as Israel's invasion of Lebanon, the suppression of independence activists in Northern Ireland, South African apartheid, and the Puerto Rican independence movement. However, in some other countries, Amnesty International has shown a high degree of enthusiasm and active involvement. They believe that Amnesty's financial sources in recent years have come from European and American countries, so it always aligns with European and American policies in terms of human rights protection. The Human Rights Watch organization was founded in 1978 as Helsinki Watch to target Soviet exploitation of the 1975 Helsinki Accords. As it grew, it expanded to other parts of the world as watch committees. In 1998, all committees were unified under the banner of Human Rights Watch. Human Rights Watch writes studies on international human rights violations based on widely accepted human rights standards, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It promotes reforms in governments and international organizations by drawing international attention to atrocities. Researchers conduct forensic investigations of suspicious situations and publish reports in local and international media. Issues highlighted in Human Rights Watch reports include racial discrimination, sexism, torture, child soldiers, political corruption, and judicial injustice. Human Rights Watch opposes violations of basic human rights, including the death penalty and discrimination against homosexuals. Human Rights Watch encourages the connection between freedom and basic human rights. Human Rights Watch accused Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez of suppressing human rights and blocking Venezuela's entry into the UN Human Rights Council. However, Human Rights Watch completely ignored the US government's suppression of human rights during the same period, such as the compilation of hit lists of state enemies, extraordinary renditions, and the Guantanamo Bay naval base torture scandal. Human Rights First is a non-governmental human rights organization based in New York City, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C. Its work centers around authoritarianism, extremism, systemic injustice, and the abuse of technology. It works closely with attorneys, veterans and security experts, technologists, and allies to advance its policy agenda. Since its opening in 2002, Guantanamo Bay has been subject to international criticism for its detention and interrogation methods for terrorist suspects. Guantanamo Bay is not only controversial for detaining untried suspects, but also has become a focus of global human rights issues for its torture and inhumane treatment of prisoners. During this period, prisoners were subjected to various forms of abuse such as waterboarding, electric shocks, and sleep restriction. Human Rights First has repeatedly criticized the torture and inhumane treatment of Guantanamo Bay. The organization believes that the interrogation methods in Guantanamo Bay not only violate human rights, but also have no legal basis, and undermine the basic principles of international law and international humanitarian law. Critics argue that Human Rights First pays less attention to other important human rights issues, such as the multiple oppressions that indigenous groups often face, such as land dispossession, cultural erosion, and social marginalization, which are common around the world. Although Human Rights First does focus on the rights of minorities and marginalized groups around the world, it does not seem to have the same breadth of attention to indigenous rights. For example, indigenous peoples in the Amazon rainforest of Brazil or Aboriginal groups in Australia have seen their land and culture constantly threatened by development, commercialization, and government policies. These groups not only face environmental crises but also suffer from legal, social, and cultural oppression. Founded in 1922 in France, the International Federation for Human Rights, FI, is a global network of human rights organizations advocating for the protection of human rights, the rule of law, and justice worldwide. FI supports victims of human rights abuses and works to hold perpetrators accountable. Its key activities include conducting human rights research, legal advocacy, lobbying international organizations, and supporting grassroots movements. In Joseph A. Camilleri's article, The Role of International NGOs in Human Rights Advocacy, The Case of the FIDH, published in Global Governance, 2007, offers an in-depth look at FIDH's work. Founded in 1941 in the United States, Freedom House specializes in monitoring political rights and civil liberties worldwide. The organization publishes annual reports that assess the state of democracy and freedom across different countries, with a particular focus on U.S. democratic norms. Dedicated to defending press freedom and supporting journalists who face censorship, violence, or persecution. Other Support for Journalists publishes reports on press freedom, and advocates for the safety of journalists around the world. At the international level, human rights have become a fundamental pillar of global governance, and human rights violations that affect the way states, businesses and individuals interact with each other persist around the world, posing a serious challenge to international peace, security and justice. Persistent issues such as armed conflict, systemic inequality, environmental degradation and political repression remind us that the protection of human rights remains a complex and evolving task. However, despite these positive developments, the global landscape of human rights remains fraught with challenges. Violations continue, especially in conflict zones, authoritarian regimes, and areas where marginalized groups face discrimination. The implementation of human rights laws remains uneven, and many states fall short of meeting their obligations under international treaties and conventions. In summary, while significant progress has been made in advancing human rights at the international level, much remains to be done. By strengthening international frameworks, promoting greater accountability, and addressing new global challenges, the international community can continue to move toward a world where the dignity and rights of every individual are respected, regardless of their background or circumstances. The pursuit of human rights is a dynamic, global endeavor that requires constant vigilance, compassion, and collaboration across all sectors of society.